Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's got their coats and jackets because in the next 18 minutes or less, you're going to be climbing Mount Everest, right? Uh, so the few facts about Mount Everest, there's a lot of intrigued about why do people climb Mount Everest? And something you need to keep in mind that 1 in 7 mountaineer dies on Mount Everest. Since 1924 until 1996, the ratio was of 1 in 4. Over the years, I think we as mountaineers have improved, and now the ratio is lesser. Also, it's kind of correlated to business because 90% of the startups also die in the first 2 years of starting the business. So if you see, what I'm trying to do over here is draw some correlation between my learnings and journey of climbing mountains for the last 20 years of my life. I did my first 8,000 meters when I was 16 years old. I was a student of Himalayan Mountaineering Institute at THINC Indonesia Institute of Advanced Mountaineering. And ever since then, I've climbed about 11 summits successfully. And Mount Everest was always on the list. So in 2016, I decided to attempt the summit of Mount Everest with a group of 6 other people. Now, the journey to Mount Everest is not as straightforward as it seems, right? It takes about 10 to 12 days just to get to the base camp of Everest. And after you get to the base camp, you go through a process called acclimatization. So as part of the process, you go from base camp to Camp 1, and then you stay the night, and you come back all the way to base camp. Then you stay for 2-3 days, you go to the base camp 1 again, stay the night, go to base camp 2, stay the night, and then you come back all the way down to the base camp again. After a few days of rest, you again go to camp 1, stay the night, go to camp 2, stay the night, and after battling for 8 to 9 hours of extreme circumstances, you climb up to 24,000 feet to camp 3. And guess where do you go after that? All the way down to the base camp all over again. So it's an extremely challenging process physically, but it's also equally frustrating as a process mentally. Because intellectually, you want to be going up, because that's where you want to end up at the summit, right? But you're spending a heck of a time actually going all the way down. So it is extremely frustrating and pretty much like business. So when I was at MIT, we were taught these 24 steps from end to finish of a startup journey, right? Or a new business journey. And again, in this journey, a hell of a time was spent actually in the first 7 or 8 steps, which was really about market assessment, research, and finding commonalities, finding what problem you're solving, and so on. So you were actually spending a lot of time at the first 6 or 7 steps, and you kept going back to those 6 or 7 steps at every stage, right, to validate your plans and objectives the way you move forward. And what the lesson I've learned from this is progress necessarily does not happen in one particular direction. Sometimes you need to keep resorting to your back positions or your base camp to actually move forward and make constant progress, make a sustainable business model to work. Okay. This is the photograph of the base camp. How many of you have seen the movie Vertical Limit or Everest? Awesome. Well, it's not like the movie. There are no parties, there are no keg parties that happen, there are no bongs being smoked, and it's just a few tents put over there and rock and a lot of ice and sometimes hail. That's what the base camp is about. But what is the most particularly challenging part about the base camp is right after the base camp is an area you cross called Khumbu Icefall, right? These are like 2,000 feet giant towers of ice blocks, right? Which the moment the sun comes out are in constant motion. And what happens with the constant motion, it opens up crevices which sometimes run to the belly of the mountain. So you don't know how deep they are in many cases, right? So it's a constant challenge. And one of the things you got to do is they put these fixed ladders and ropes across these crevices. So you got to climb one of these rickety aluminum ladder across these crevices, and sometimes there are 70 to 80 ladders that you have to pass through, wearing your crampons on your shoes, trying to balance yourself, and believe me, the best of us have the fear of God in us, right? And what you also do is when you're getting to the base camp, you go through a little dedication to all those who have died on Mount Everest, so that image is playing in your head. And this is also one of the areas of Everest where the majority of deaths and accidents have happened, right? But amidst all of this, there is a great lesson to learn. And the lesson is, fear is okay. You can be fearful, but complacency is what is going to kill you. And if you reflect about the businesses, what happens to some of the best brands in the world who are great at one stage in their life cycle, but today you don't even hear about them, right? They've been overtaken or they do not exist anymore, right? And the reason for that is they became complacent as they progressed further, and they actually were not fearful of the competition. So once again, fear is okay, complacency is what's going to kill you. Everest is definitely a journey of 1,000 miles, right? And it always stops with the small steps. The lesson I learned across the journey was you're only as good as your team. It's always relying on strengths of someone. And I think the best lesson in leadership, because everyone feels as a team leader, you are the leader, right? You're supposed to lead people. But actually, that's not true in mountaineering. Everyone's a leader. Because sometimes you are the person responsible for logistics, you take the lead on that. Sometimes there is a person who's responsible for actually route planning and communications. They are the leader. Sometimes there is just a Sherpa who has climbed Everest 17 times. And my climbing Sherpa is 17 times summiteer of Everest, Sherpa Fulpa. And I think he's ready to break a world record next year with his 25th summit of Everest. And he's a leader sometimes. So you're only as good as team, just like in businesses. You know, look at your businesses around, and one of the key issues I keep hearing, and we have a recruitment practice in Hotelivate, and one of the key issues and challenges is, how do we get the kind of quality resources to work with us that we can totally rely on? The second thing is climbing Everest is not all physical pain, mental stress, and trauma that you go through. It's also a lot of fun. And just like in every good business, some of the most fantastic places to work in the world are those which make it fun to work, right? Facebook is a great example. Apple's campus is a great example. Expedia sitting here, I've really enjoyed spending time at their campus. It's a great example. And they make it fun to work. But ultimately, on the summit climb, all that matters is the man standing next to you, either to the right or to the left. But in my case, there was only one, my climbing Sherpa, and that's all that mattered. And similarly, in business, it's always your next in command that's going to do. I don't know, how many of you watch Simon Sinek? Have you heard of Simon Sinek? Okay. So if you watch Simon Sinek, he talks about a concept of the first follower, right? So he says it's not the leader who's important, it's the first follower who's important. And the reason for that is because he shows a video of this guy doing some crazy dance, and he goes on doing it for 5 minutes till the time the first person joins, right? And he starts joining him in the first, and he starts calling all his other friends, right? And now you've got a whole group of these people doing a crazy dance, right? So who was more important, the first follower? Because he's the one who kind of stimulated the whole crowd to actually join in and be part of that gathering. It's a beautiful image of Mount Everest, the summit. Clear day, beautiful skies. But Mount Everest is really, really funny place because this beautiful camp, this is on the high camp, a photograph of the high camp, one of my favorite photographs of the Everest journey. It can look like this. And in a matter of an hour, it can look like this. So with the extremities of the weather at that altitude, things are in constant change. Things are absolutely changing at a very rapid pace. And not just change pertaining to weather, it's also the route, the condition of the fixed ropes, your condition of the team, the condition of the equipment that you're carrying, the condition of the supply of oxygen that you may have. So all of these things are constantly changing. And you may have formed whatever plan that you started with, but the plan becomes absolutely obsolete as you're going through the climb because you need to constantly adapt, improvise, and change to the plan. So the one lesson that you learned from this is that only constant is change. And so many times in business, we have these conversations saying, oh, I want to stick to the plan because that's what we planned for. But all of you are hoteliers, and you would know that one little eruption of a volcano in Bali can have a significant impact on the occupancy and demand in the marketplace, right? So you need to constantly, so you may have formed whatever plan, but it's the execution that matters. So rather than focusing on the plan you followed, it's the execution that matters. And like they say, 90% of the beautiful ideas in the world failed and never materialized because the execution was really poor. And that's what you learn as in an environment where split-second decisions matter. It could be life or it could be death. Similarly, in business, it could be a profitable business or the one that is going to perish over a period of time. This is me on a place called the Geneva Spur. Geneva Spur is the last of the most challenging phases before you get to the high camp. The high camp is at 26,000 feet altitude. Now, why is this so tough is because this is where the death zone starts. And the reason it's called a death zone because anything above 26,000 feet altitude, your body starts to die. The blood starts pulling out of your veins from your hands and your feet, and the body focuses on your vital organs, which is really your heart, your brain, and that's where the blood flow is happening. I was dead beat over here. But you know what? The great part about this image is I've given it to a couple of friends, and I said, you can put your own face over here. No one would know. Because we all covered up in face masks. We are covered totally in our jumpsuits and our down suits and so on. But this is an area where, for the first time, it starts hitting you. Man, what am I doing here, right? Am I going to perish and die over here? So all of these kind of different thoughts are bleeding. So at 26,000 feet, you wake up at like 10:30 in the night. You get a few hours of sleep with your oxygen on because that's how you can sleep for a few hours. And then you start for your summit push. And the summit push starts at 26,000 feet. In your head, you're thinking, wow, I need to climb 3,000 vertical feet, which is the flying altitude of a 777-800 aircraft. It's a cruising altitude, right? So you're not meant to be there as a human. It's not meant for survival. How am I going to do this? And I think the lesson I learned over here is you got to break it down into smaller steps. So what I would do is I would look at the next rock or next block of ice lying somewhere, right? And I would look at that and I say, okay, I need to get there. And if you're thinking you're having a slow day, this is how it works. Because you need to take one step and then breathe 5 times to 10 times. And then another step, and then that's the way you climb, right, at this altitude. So you got to put small little milestones, and every time you get to the milestone, you say, wow, I got here, now let me make the next milestone. Similarly, business works exactly the same way. Someone was talking about, okay, we want to expand to 4,000 hotels, but the journey to the 4,000 hotels starts with that one hotel and making that a success, and going on to 10 hotels, making that a success, going to 25 hotels, making that a success. So it's always based on small little milestones, and we must celebrate each one of these milestones, and that was one of the biggest lessons when you climbing Everest that you get at 26,000 feet altitude, when your brain is almost dying. That is the beautiful Hillary step. the most photographed place on Earth. And Hillary Step is perhaps the biggest test of your human mettle and endurance, because on one side you can fall down 8,000 feet into Nepal. On the other side, you can fall down on the north side, you can fall down 10,000 feet into Tibet, so depending which side you want to die on, right? And it's also perhaps the last step before you get to an area called the Knife's Edge, which is a little ledge at the south summit. So there's the summit of Everest, there's the Lhotse summit, and there's the south summit in between, which is just below Everest, right? Uh, it's about 288 meters away from the summit of Everest. And while I was climbing this, my fear reached, I think the US Army says code 4, the highest code, or code 6. That's exactly what happened to me, DEFCON 1, right? Because we suddenly saw this whole storm coming towards us. And before we knew it, we were caught up while on Hillary Step, a little ahead towards South Column, uh, in winds of 90 kilometers an hour and snow pounding us. In the midst of it, I think I had the biggest emotional lesson of my life, because we were hit by these pounding hail and snow that the mountain was throwing. And in the midst of that, a couple of our team members suffered grave injuries, including a Sherpa. So now you are 288 meters away from the summit. What do? You've got a Sherpa whose hit is ice pick on his hand, profusely bleeding, and rescue at that altitude requires extreme amount of strength and endurance. So we could have either gone to the summit, left them there, tried to pick them up and bring them down, but it's quite possible that the probability of death would be more inevitable for those people. So within a matter of 3 minutes, enduring all the storm, we decided to give up our summit bid and instead focus energy on rescuing those people. So 4 of us took on the mettle of trying to rescue us. And I think this was a WhatsApp group which our base camp manager had created for our friends and family, just to keep them updated on where we were. Everest Link wasn't up when I was climbing, so you couldn't necessarily tweet all the time. They were changing the whole link setups that year in 2016. And we carried this mission of trying to rescue people. And I think the biggest lesson you learn in life is that the toughest action is actually making a choice, right? Like they say in the Matrix, you can only be the one if you choose to be the one, otherwise you're not the one, right? The movie Matrix. So it's pretty much like that, that you actually have few split seconds to decide. And you have to choose really the battles, most importantly, you care about. And what was the driving force behind this decision? The mountain is always going to be there. And at the end of the day, what is the summit? It's just some rock and stone and a lot of ice. But a human life, there is no equivalent to that. And that is what needs to be saved. And that is a priority that is more important. And that is what we all care about more. That is the battle we want to fight. And I'm pleased to report that on 18th May 2016, the Sherpa was successfully taken down to the base camp. It's one of the most outrageously crazy rescue mission ever carried at that altitude of Mount Everest. And the Nepalese government acknowledged that. And I'm glad to say that today the Sherpa, next year when he climbs Everest, is going to be his 7th summit of Mount Everest. So he lives to see another day. He's lived to feed his family. Some of these guys make more than $10,000 a year at best. And the only time they make it when they're climbing Mount Everest. So once a year, that's their income, right? So I think what was important was saving. And I think the lesson sometimes is it's not always important to get to the summit. It's the journey that matters. It's what you do. There's so many people over here. I mean, Manav is a great example. I was talking to him. He's done quite a few businesses in life. Some have been extremely successful, some not so successful. But I think what makes his business is successful is because he's been able to not focus on the summit, but he's been able to focus on the journey. And it's not to patronize Manav, but just an example, which I picked up. And I think that is the most important lesson. So at that time, I used to be head of marketing and strategy for Four Seasons brand for Asia. And I think my most heartening moment was coming home, my homecoming. When I entered my office, this is how my office looked, right? They decked it up with, a lot of styrofoam, tried to make it look like I'm in the mountains on Everest. That's what they did to my chairs. Took me like a whole week to clear the mess out. Uh, and they put encouraging pictures. And I think that was one of my best lessons I could have ever taken, is that be proud of your failures as proud you are of success. And sometimes we forget that what made us successful were a series of failures, series of mistakes. And I think no one sitting in this room can ever doubt that they haven't made mistakes, they haven't had failures in their life, they haven't had moments of dejection and moment of truths in their life. So that was my moment of truth. And a lot of people ask me, sometimes you're in a party and your friend will introduce you, oh, by the way, Puneet's climbed Everest. And someone will say, all the way up there? And then you kind of explain, no, actually, it's like 2,000 feet, we had to like go back and save and do all that. Oh, so you haven't climbed Everest. So, sometimes just to joke, and I say, so what do you do, mate, in life? And he's like, oh, I work for McKinsey. I said, oh, I'm just taking an arbitrary name of a company. I work for McKinsey, but it's a real story with another company. I said, oh, so you must be the CEO of the company. And the guy says, no, I'm actually head of finance for the company. Oh, so you actually don't work for McKinsey. Because if you're not the CEO, you haven't actually worked for McKinsey, right? So I have these fun moments and I have these fun times. But I think something that sticks into my mind is what Ed Hillary said. That as a mountain, you can't grow, but as a human, and I can and I will come back and conquer you. And I'm happy to report in 2020, I'm set for a National Geographic mission of a documentary on Everest, and I will be part of the team that is going to help form that documentary, and hopefully I shall go back and conquer the summit again. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope you've taken as many lessons from your little brief encounter with Everest as I have. Thank you.